RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery. Hello Cave Dwellers, welcome to the cave. Look at it. Just look at it. It's a thing of absolute beauty. A purple Amiga 500++. This is a board which I've built from the ground up this week. I've inhaled a lot of solder fumes, I've drunk a lot of coffee, but I've got it built and it's working miraculously. What we've got here is a board made by Rob Taylor. He's known as Peepo UK on Twitter. And it's born out of necessity because so many A500 pluses are destroyed by leaking Varta batteries. The Varta normally lives here. We haven't got one in and you can see that it's cheekily crossed out on the board there. The battery leaks, it destroys the traces, if not the chips, if it leaks too badly. In fact, I saw one the other day that was stored upright and the Varta had leaked all the way down to the Agnes chip and had completely ruined that. So all of these boards are getting destroyed. If you're very careful, you can repair them, you can rebuild the traces, but some are just too far gone. So the next best thing is to now get this board, transfer the custom chips like Agnes, Denise, Paula, Gary, which are not made anymore. So you transfer them on and everything else that you see here is pretty much brand new. This is a 99% brand new Amiga, the newest Amiga on the planet at this moment. Why have I built it? Well, this is not a channel where we ask why. But the reason behind it is the recent Checkmate 1500 Plus case, which we saw on the channel. Here it is. This is Stephen Jones's invention and a beautiful case it is too. So I was contemplating what I should put in there and what better to go in a new Amiga case than a brand new Amiga. And a brand new Amiga that looks as good as this. So there are three things that need to happen today. One, I'll show you the building of the board. That will take up the biggest portion of today's video. Two is transplanting it into the case. And then three, which will be another video in the near future, will be considering what upgrades we should buy and really pimping my Amiga to create the ultimate brand new Amiga with all the bells and whistles added. So let's get to work on building it because it wasn't without issue, as you'll see. It all started then with a bill of materials, or BOM, a list of the components needed to build our Amiga, and I have to be honest, it was a little daunting when they arrived. Over 330 components make up this build. On a positive note though, this electronics jigsaw is made up of through-hole components, which will be much easier to work on than their surface-mounted equivalents. The best approach then is to break our big problem down into lots of smaller ones and focus on one part of the build at a time, and also to have lots of tea nearby. Lots and lots of tea. Looking at the BOM, which is freely available to anyone who wants to tackle the build, I decided to start with the small and hardy components and build the board up from there to minimise the risk of me damaging components, melting sockets with the hot iron and the like. So I kicked off with the resistors. One down, 339 to go. Rob Taylor, who created the board, is a good friend of the cave, so I had the opportunity to ask him about its creation. Amazingly, it's the first PCB that Rob has seen through to production, although he did experiment with creating an A501, that's the RAM expansion for the Amiga 500, and also a Commodore 64 board. But it was the Amiga 500 Plus that he decided to see through to production. And the first solder is now on our board. The Amiga 500 has some great big ground planes which I like to quickly conduct heat away, so I worked on this board at 370 degrees C, and once or twice I did hit close to 400 degrees, but made quick work of it at those temperatures so as not to lift pads. The Amiga 500 and 1200 were Rob's childhood computers, just like the 500 was mine, so they hold a special interest to us both, and many of you watching I'm sure. A recreation of the 1200 is already out there, thanks to John Chucky Hurtle, and John is a name who Rob thanks on the silk screen of the board, so Rob decided to tackle the A500 Plus instead. It's a machine that has a reputation for destroying itself thanks to a Varta battery on the system board which leaks and destroys anything in its path. The 500++ board then is a chance for us to revive those dead 500+ machines by transplanting the custom chips across to it, because those chips aren't produced anymore, but anything else can be salvaged and reused. Because I chose to use new parts across the board, this build came close to £130, which is ridiculous. And all just to say that this is the newest Amiga on the planet. You can save yourself lots of money by reusing sockets and components from the old board if you just allow yourself some more time to remove them. And on the subject of costs, this wasn't without cost for Rob to create. This is board revision 2.1. A couple of mistakes did exist on earlier versions, which after production left Rob £1,000 out of pocket, and with only a pile of faulty PCBs to show for it. Thankfully though, 2.1, which we have here, also known as the Purple Beast, is without problems, and it sounds a whole lot better than the earlier revision, which was known as Baby Vomit, owing to its unusual colour. Purple is a much better choice for the final product. Next up, I fitted this row of blue capacitors along the back of the board. These have 3 instead of 2 leads and are used for EMI or electromagnetic interference suppression. They were usually an orangey brown colour on the 500+, or sometimes a purpley blue. Which one you had really came down to which company was selling them the cheapest at the time Commodore was ordering stock. Sometimes Murata, sometimes TDK, anything to keep the costs down, and that applies to all components on the board. Commodore would buy in bulk and buy as cheaply as possible. The finish to my work will not be anywhere near as perfect as a board produced in a factory by a machine. Of course, I'm not a machine, but I do feel like one sat here working on it all day long. But I will try to get as neat a finish as I possibly can. On to our next component, the resistor packs. The ground pin on these are indicated by a little black dot, so look carefully for them and make sure that they do go in the correct way around. A really nice and unexpected touch on this board is a list of thanks shown here to those who have supported Rob in the project. I was quite touched and surprised to see that my name is on that list. So thank you, Rob, it makes the build all the more special for me, as too I'm sure it will to the other names on there. Cageman, Chrissy, Game Whisperer, Kai, Zoinks, Abraxas, Pillock and Mindflare Retro, who are also on the Roll of Honour. So how do I keep my patience when I'm working on a project like this, you might be thinking? Well, that's easy. Big old headphones and relaxing music are a must to block out any distractions. And it really is worth taking your time over each joint. With so many components to install, a single component in the wrong way round or a bad joint could lead to hours if not days of troubleshooting to try and get to the bottom of it. So despite the costs to Rob, he was really encouraged by the community who rallied around him to get it finished, and the board is now available to buy. So I'll post a link in the description where you can buy yourself one and Rob can try to cover his costs while providing a really valuable service to us Amiga fans. And he's already working on his next project. It's a Jupiter Ace recreation. The Jupiter Ace is quite a rare machine and it doesn't have any custom ICs, so that's an opportunity to create a computer from scratch that you might otherwise not have had a chance to buy. This whole idea of building a computer from kit form is something that I thought I'd missed out on. I was too young when the Sinclair ZX80 or 81 appeared in our shops as kits to build. So to have the chance to do one now, and to be doing it on a machine that was so pivotal to my own computing career, is just really heartwarming, and I appreciate the opportunity that Rob's given to us. With our IC sockets in place, this is really starting to take shape and look like a real Amiga. The next job is the rear connectors, starting with the DB9s for the mouse and joysticks, then our phono audio outputs with that huge Amiga stereo separation on left and right. You know what I'm talking about if you've used an Amiga. And also the commonly available DB25 ports. But we do now run into a problem. The power port is not available, so we'll need to reclaim that from a damaged old A500, and the DB23 ports are really hard to find these days. DB23 is used most importantly for the video output, so again, we'll need to reclaim some parts to complete that whole row of connectors. Designer Rob has discussed changing the DB23 to a DB25 port, and now that he has this complete replica board, he can go off on tangents and modify it however he wishes. My only concern, however, would be if you put a bigger port in, then you also need to modify the case, which is more destructive than many would like to do. So maybe he'll come up with another solution in the longer term. We switch over to an old donor board now, which is not that lovely purple colour, but good old-fashioned green, and with lots of flux and a very hot iron, we reclaim the old connectors. This old board was sent to me with evidence of a battery leak, as well as lots of missing chips. A RAM module had been taken and lots of logic was missing and had been socketed and then removed, so I just have empty sockets on it. In short, it had been terrorised, hopefully to fix another machine, but who knows, maybe it was just an abandoned repair, so I don't feel too bad about taking parts off of it. Another important part to claim is the hybrid video IC here. This is responsible for turning our digital red, green and blue signals into analog ones for the monitor or RF modulator, and it also generates the monochrome composite video output. It's another part which is no longer manufactured. We've laid claim then to the DB23 and power sockets, a 28 MHz oscillator, the floppy drive power header, the hybrid video board and an FB802 ferrite, and these all now need to go into our new 500++. If you're in any doubt as to what you need to take from the old board, it is all listed on the BOM sheet. Everything you need is there to get this job completed. In migrating these old parts to our new board then, it's the rear connectors where I really ramped up the iron temperature, because not only are they electrically connected to the board, they're also mechanically anchored to the board with great blobs of solder on the ground plane. Making sure they're well in on these anchor points prevents stress being caused to the more delicate solder joints when you're plugging devices in and out, and potentially causing those ports to wobble slightly. Over time, that can break the joints. Then we put the custom chips in from my lunchbox of Amiga spares, because we've all got our lunchbox full of Amiga ICs, haven't we? This being a 500+, we want the CIA chips, Gary and Paula, as well as the newer Agnes chip so we can support 2 megs of chip RAM, and the newer Super Denise chip. You'll also spot that there's a red custom RAM board in the RAM sockets. Pretend you didn't see this because there's a fault in it, and we'll revisit that in the next episode. So for testing, I do revert to some spare RAM chips of the type the A500 originally used, which will magically appear as we finish our build now and return to the desk. That was the board built then, but it didn't quite go to plan, because when I first checked it out, I just got a black screen. Didn't work at all, and there are so many variables involved in building this, so many components, that my natural reaction was it must be something I've done. It must be my soldering, it must be that I put a part in the wrong place. And sure enough, I had made a few minor mistakes. I put one capacitor in the wrong way round over in the audio circuit over here, and I'd put the RS232 chip in the wrong socket. That was it. I'd caught them in time before any damage was done. Considering the number of components on here, I was quite happy with that error rate, and no damage was done, so that was the important thing. But it still didn't work, and after a lot more diagnosis, I discovered that my Agnes chip was not working. So it was one of the custom chips which was at fault. I had no way of testing it because the 500+ Agnes chip doesn't work in the 500. It's not pin compatible, so I didn't have another 500+ to test it in. So thank you to Keith over at the Digital Orphanage, who has lent me his Agnes. This is a loaner in here at the moment until I buy myself one. We put that in, and we immediately got a green screen, which was some progress. A green screen indicates normally that you've got a RAM problem, and sure enough, I swapped out some RAM chips and we were going. We got the Kickstart prompt here. A 1.3, by the way, so this is an older Kickstart ROM that I had in my box of bits, rather than what you would have got with the 500 Plus originally. So for that reason, I only have 512K of RAM in this board, but we will fix that in future. The important thing is that it's working. The other thing that the eagle-eyed among you may have spotted that is missing is the expansion connector here. And the reason that that's not in there is because a lot of the other guys who have built this have told me that the header on the bill of materials, which I've bought here, because it's a rounded pin, it sits quite loosely in expansion boards. They're not very, it works, but they're not very happy about it. So I'm going to get something that gives a snugger fit. But I don't know that I'll even use that. It all depends on what upgrades I fit, because the extra RAM will likely come off of the Zorro card or whatever it is that we put in here as an expansion. So we may not even fit that at all. But as I said, the important thing is that it's working. Let's pop a disc in. I think I've got Defender of the Crown on here, just to prove to you that it goes beyond the simple kickstart screen. And I've tested this as extensively as I can. The audio works, the joystick, the mouse works, the picture is solid. It's all perfect. I'm really happy. I don't want to tempt fate, but I'm really happy with it and it's working beautifully. So the next step then is to get it into that Checkmate 1500 Plus case before I do any damage to it, get it securely in there, see how glorious it looks, and decide on the next steps that we need to take. So let's do that right now. Returning to the channel then, it's the Checkmate 1500 Plus case. If you haven't seen the review already, then you can find it in the description where you can get a much closer look at just what this case is. And I hope you consider the 500++ to be a worthy resident of this new case. We could of course opted to put an original Amiga board in, a PC, an FPGA, all kind of things, but today it's the 500++ we've gone with, and installation really isn't too taxing. Why? Because I learned my lesson when I reviewed this case. I read the manual, which I'm sure Stephen Jones, creator of the case, will be delighted to hear. At the time of making this video, Stephen has just passed the 50% mark of shipping all of the cases that he's sold on Kickstarter, because it was due to the Kickstarter backers that this thing exists. And hopefully when he's finished that process, there'll be more made available, so I'll include links to his website so that you can keep an eye on that. Now our 500++ board sits at the bottom of the case on some standoffs which I need to install, and then there's this additional board which slots onto the side expansion where you'd normally fit a hard drive or an A500 CD drive, any kind of expansion like that, to the side of your 500, and that would stick out the side of the case. Well, this card does two jobs. It allows us to fit expansions internally in the case because it brings them back around and inside the case rather than outside, and it also allows us to power the Amiga with a modern PSU, eliminating the old and potentially dangerous power brick. It's an optional extra. The standard board inside the case, which I'll remove now, can also be used with a modern PSU, but instead of powering the Amiga via the edge connector, it loops back out of the case and into the regular power socket at the back of the board. And of course it's lacking the slots to allow you to install a Zorro expansion card, so it's really useful to go for that upgraded option. Next up, it's the power supply, and it's important that you get an SFX form factor PSU to fit properly in the case, because a regular size one is just too large to fit in the case. You have to get this reduced size one. They are readily available though, and just a quick search away, but I will provide a link to the one that I've specifically bought in the description. It installs just like any other PSU in any other case, with screws around the back of the case to hold it in. And then the power cable runs across to our expansion board. The keyboard is the next thing we need to consider. The optional keyboard case from Checkmate adds a port to the case, which we plug into the Amiga board and then fit to the back of the case here. An original Amiga keyboard then slots straight into the Checkmate case here, which also has holes for the power and disk activity lights, and a nice long cable which connects the two together. Whether or not I'll use this in the long term, I still haven't decided. There are plenty of options out there, and we'll explore those in part 3. And then, with everything in place, it was time for the big moment, a new Amiga built by my own hand in a new Amiga case. Let's just take a moment to enjoy it. I cannot begin to tell you how rewarding it is to have built this from an empty board, A500++, and then see it working in this glorious Checkmate case. And hopefully that feeling is something that you might get to feel for yourself if you decide to tackle the 500++ build, which I wholeheartedly encourage you all to do so. What do you think? For me, it really is a thing of beauty. If the purple PCB wasn't enough for you, this case is just glorious, even more so now that it's actually working. There's still a lot more work to do. So you'll have noticed I've kept the Gotek external. That's just because I like to swap it between all of the Amigas that I use. I don't like to go to the expense of lots and lots of Goteks. So what we'll have to do is blank this off, or I do have a slot loading CD drive, so we might put a CD drive in here. There's obviously upgrades to go in there. I'd like to add hard disk capability. I'd like to increase the clock speed. All sorts of good things that need to go in there in the next episode. And the wonderful thing about this is down here is a slot for SD cards. So if I can get a hard drive solution that I can extend out to the front, we can just have an SD card that pops in and out. We can set that up with WHD load, and that can be a really accessible and easy to use Amiga where I can swap the card out to my PC to set it up if I need to. I think that's about everything that I need to do. Obviously there's a sticker to go there, a Checkmate sticker or otherwise, just to finish it off. And with the keyboard, I haven't decided if I'm going to keep this or if I'm going to find a modern solution, maybe a modern mechanical keyboard. I've got the garage for this, so I can put 2 spacers underneath to lift the whole case up, and then you can slide the keyboard under it like the A1000, which is really nice. But this one is too wide to do that. So if I can find a nice solution that doesn't sacrifice too much in terms of the custom Amiga keys and keeps it nice and usable, then I think that would be a nice finishing touch. Otherwise, I'm really pleased with it. So I think that's quite enough Amiga for you all for one episode today. I'm getting hot under the collar after all this, and I bet you are too, because it's been, let's be honest, it's been a sexy episode. I can't wait for part 3. I hope you'll join me for it. Until then, take care and see you next time, guys. If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.